Level 3 is very important because at this level, we add acoustic treatment to the room, which allows our studio monitors to perform as they're intended. In fact, if your budget allows for it, I'd recommend making the jump from level 1 to level 3 directly, because in level 2, with an untreated room, you won't really be getting the most out of your studio monitors anyway. We've already discussed frequency response for headphones. As a reminder, frequency response describes how the headphones respond to various frequencies, and that tells us a lot about the frequency balance of music that's played through those headphones. Well, speakers have a frequency response too. It's measured by playing a reference signal into the speaker, measuring what comes out, and then comparing the two. This is similar to the way headphone frequency response is measured. The difference between what goes in and what comes out is the frequency response. But there's another layer of complexity when it comes to measuring the frequency response of a speaker. That's the room. In the lab, manufacturers measure a studio monitor's frequency response in an anechoic chamber. This is a room with acoustic treatment on the floor, the ceiling, and the walls, and it's engineered to have virtually zero reflections. This allows manufacturers to isolate the frequency response of the studio monitor, which makes sense because everyone's room will be different. The frequency response specification of a studio monitor is usually accompanied by a frequency response graph, such as this graph for the Atom A7Vs. But when you take the A7Vs out of the anechoic chamber and put them into your studio, another layer of frequency response is added to the signal chain, the frequency response of your room. And the frequency response of a room is much more complicated to conceptualize in a simple graph. If your room is completely untreated with rigid, flat surfaces on the walls, ceiling, and floor, here's what tends to happen. Sound from the studio monitor will take multiple pathways to the listening position. It will travel directly from the studio monitor to the listening position, but it will also travel indirectly from the speaker to a hard surface and then to the listening position. Those indirect pathways are longer, and therefore the indirect sound reaches the listener slightly later than the direct sound. And when these two pathways converge at the listening position, they interfere with each other. Let me explain why that's such a problem in audio. If you were just playing a simple sine wave at a specific frequency, that shift in time would result in either a total cancellation, a total summation, or somewhere in between, depending on the wavelength of the frequency in question and the difference in the distance traveled. However, music contains many different frequencies all at once with many different wavelengths. That means the same difference in distance between direct and indirect pathways will result in different levels of interference throughout the frequency spectrum. Some frequencies will completely cancel out, some will completely sum together and get louder, and everything in between will be some combination of the two. This is known as comb filtering because the resulting frequency graph resembles a comb. Now, you may ask, as I initially asked when I was first learning about this, can we just use an EQ correction software like SonarWorks to fix the comb filter? And I will say some room effects can be counteracted with EQ correction. But this problem with the early reflections, particularly the cancellations that occur, can't really be fixed with EQ. If 300 Hz is being canceled when the direct and indirect sound converges, just as an example, we could try boosting 300 Hz to counteract that cancellation, but we'd be boosting both the direct and indirect sound at 300 Hz, which is kind of like going from 1 plus -1 equals 0 to 10 plus -10 equals 0. It doesn't fix the problem. On the other hand, if you're able to place acoustic treatment on the wall or the ceiling, wherever the reflection is occurring, to absorb some of that energy that would otherwise reflect back to the listening position, you'll hear a dramatic improvement compared to the bare walls. You can find a link below to the acoustic treatment kit that I'd recommend if you're just getting started. The first reflections are the most destructive because they're the closest in level to the direct sound. Remember, sound waves lose energy as they travel through space. That means the sound that reflects off of one wall and then another and then goes to the listening position will be lower in level and will therefore create less extreme interference with the direct sound, which will be much louder. That's not to say those longer reflections can't cause issues, though. When thinking about the longer reflections, we shift our focus to how they lengthen the reverb tail of the room. The more sound that bounces around the room, the longer the reverb tail in the room will be, and that could lead to the problem I mentioned earlier, where the reverb tail masks some of the elements of the mix and gives you a distorted sense of how much reverb the end listener will hear. What's especially important to consider is the length of the reverb at particular frequencies. The length of reverb in a room is often discussed in terms of the RT60, the amount of time it takes the reverberation to decay by 60 decibels. There's an overall RT60 for the room, and perhaps equally important, an RT60 for each frequency band. Rather than trying to absorb all of the reverb in your room, it's usually recommended to use acoustic treatment strategically with the goal of smoothing out the reverb time so all the frequencies decay somewhat evenly. If you've ever stepped inside an anechoic chamber, you'll know that you definitely do not want to mix inside one. It sounds unnatural because we never hear music in an environment with absolutely no reverb. The most difficult thing to do with acoustic treatment, though, is to treat resonances in the low frequencies. The most problematic resonances, especially in smaller rooms, are the axial room modes, the resonances that occur between two surfaces in the room, between the floor and the ceiling, the front and back wall, or the side walls. The reason these are so difficult to treat has to do with the way typical absorption panels work. The lower the frequency, the thicker the panel needs to be. And when you go chasing more absorption at lower frequencies, you not only eat more and more space in your room, but you also run the risk of absorbing too much energy at higher frequencies. I won't go into all of this here in this video because this topic warrants a whole channel of videos. But I do have more in-depth videos that go into what I'd recommend in terms of acoustic treatment. You can just search Acoustic Treatment Audio University to find those videos. The bottom line, a few strategically placed panels can make a huge difference compared to no acoustic treatment at all. Like I said, treat those early reflection points first. Beyond that, you can incrementally improve your treatment setup over time, but you'll never make it perfect, and that's okay. As a recap so far, studio monitors and headphones are both essential for mixing, and you'll get the most out of your studio monitors if you add some acoustic treatment. Once you've got that covered, you might consider moving on to level 4.